Well, hello again, my friends and fellow Invisibles. My name is Adrian Gilbert, and I'd like to welcome you back to the Invisible College. And we got a bit of a different one today. I thought about this after talking to a friend of mine, and he was telling me about how a friend of his, he didn't say who, had got himself caught up in some kind of cult. Now, if you don't know what a cult is, used in the modern sense, it's generally speaking where you have a guru figure, and he draws to himself a following of students. They might call themselves sannyasins or something like that, probably wearing special clothing, being taught mantras, but basically being exploited in some way. And at least that's how it looks like from the outside. To the sannyasin himself or herself, they're following the path, they're following their guru, they believe what they're being taught, they believe wholly in it, and they're ready to dedicate their life to this movement or whatever it is. And I thought we'd perhaps have a little bit of a look at what really is going on with such cults, and we're going to take a few examples of them. But before we do that, I want to have a little look about reality and what reality appears to be, and what it really is that we don't see. So without more ado, let's get on with of cults, gurus and politicians. You'll find out why the politicians towards the end. And stay with it, but I think you'll enjoy this one. Now then, we're going to have a look at the existent world as we would know it. And I'm going to draw a line here, and you'll see why as we go on a little bit. And first of all, we're going to have a look at what is generally called the natural world. And this is the world that we see with our senses, that we know, we're all too familiar with. We study sciences to do with it. And we see here that it divides into three different realms or kingdoms. The animal kingdom, the vegetable kingdom, and the mineral kingdom. And we know that. You must have heard this probably when you were in primary school, I should think. And we have a sense that, an understanding that there's a hierarchy here, that the mineral kingdom is the lowest one, inanimate matter. We got a vegetable kingdom above that, things growing, vegetables grow in the sunlight, they're taking carbon dioxide and give out oxygen. And then we have an animal kingdom. Animals can move around. They're independent of place much more than the vegetables are. And everything eats everything else. But we talk about that in another lecture. And I want you to see here that we divide this into two parts. We had the animate, which is the animal kingdom, and the vegetable kingdom. That's things which are alive. And we have the inanimate, the mineral kingdom. And if you're a scientist, you study natural philosophy, which is the study of nature, of the natural world. And we include in that all the things like electrons and neutrons and molecules and atoms. And we look out with our telescopes at the stars, and we see that they to us appear just to be balls of hydrogen turning into helium. And as far as we can tell, it's inanimate as well, like the mineral kingdom. We speculate, some of us anyway, speculate there might be other planets like ours, but we would think they must be very, very rare, So we know about the planet that we live on. It's a ball largely of water, and it's very rare to have liquid water that's not been turned into gas and not been frozen into ice, to have all this water on this planet. And that's because it's in what's called the Goldilocks region. Not too hot, not too cold, just right. And we also have carbon here, and oxygen, nitrogen, all sorts of other elements that can combine together to form various kinds of molecules and then crystals, and living things can form here. And we believe, or we're taught in science, this idea of evolution, that there was a primary, some kind of single-celled organism that began to evolve. We don't know why it began to evolve, but it began to evolve. And then things began to change. You get more complex things happening, forming by chance, they say, taking millions and millions of years to do so, but changing. And over these long eons of time, we get various kinds of worms, we get fish, we get birds, we get dinosaurs, we get blue whales, we get us. Yeah? This is the contemporary modern physics, or not physics, modern science of life that we're taught in biology. But is it true? Well, I don't think so. But we look out at the stars and we look into space and we think, well, that's all dead up there. Lucky us living on our little blue ball, the only little island of life floating around in this big ocean of space, around this, not a special star, but just at the right distance to allow life to progress. So that's the modern contemporary myth, the myth of creation, the myth of development of different species, the myth of how we got here, the myth of who we are. We're just animals in this version of the myth. We're just naked apes. There was a famous book, wasn't there? The Naked Ape. That we're nothing better than apes ourselves, just have a slightly larger brain, and we can do more, but we're nothing that special. That's the modern contemporary view. But there is a different view, and it's to do with what's above the line. Above the line is the supernatural world. So what is that? We don't know, do we? But in the ancient world, they understood very well that you have the natural world, the world of the animals, the rocks, the food, the people, everything. And you have the supernatural world. The supernatural world consisting of gods, of angels, of devils, of all sorts of things like that. And that you can't see, but are there nonetheless. That it's another world above this world. And you can say it's the heavenly world. And all religions are to do with the understanding that there is a supernatural world above nature. It's not as constrained as nature. It doesn't have to obey the same laws as nature. It doesn't have to obey laws of gravity, for example. It doesn't have to obey the same material laws that mean you can't be in two places at once, for example. There's all sorts of different ideas about the supernatural world that don't apply to the natural world. Now, why have I brought this up? Because I think it's going to help us when we start looking into this whole idea about cults and demons and all of that, and see a bit more how the supernatural world does indeed penetrate the natural world, but usually in invisible ways. It can manifest. It does manifest to some people. You get people tell us, maybe 100 people see a vision of the Virgin Mary appear somewhere, and they go and build a grotto at Lourdes or something. It can happen that you get these apparitions, but mostly it's done quietly, invisibly, and we don't see the way the supernatural world interacts with the natural world and interacts with the human world in particular. So that's what we're going to look at. Now, turning first of all to the Bible, we've been doing quite a lot on the book of Revelation, but there's a lot more in the Bible, in the New Testament in particular. Jesus was, above all, he was not just a preacher who got himself crucified. He was someone who carried out miracles. And if you don't believe that, you're not a true Christian. That's what it says in the Bible. In the New Testament, there are lots of witnesses to these miracles that he carried out. Miracles of healing very often. But he also carried out exorcisms, where he cast out demons from people. And there's a famous one here. If we read the Bible, we learn that he frequently cast out demons from possessed people. A good example is the story in Mark's Gospel, where he casts out a legion of demons from a man who lived among tombs. That's what it says in that chapter. You can read it for yourself. These demons asked to be cast into a herd of pigs. These promptly ran away and jumped off a cliff down into the sea. The sea in question is the Sea of Galilee. It had been rowed across the Sea of Galilee to the other side, which must have been what we would now call Jordan. And that was called the land of the Gadarenes at that time. And presumably the Gadarenes were not Jewish. And they were able to eat pork, eat bacon. So they had pigs. And these demons asked to be cast out into the pigs. So what were these demonic spirits? Were they supernatural entities, or was the man simply suffering from what we today would regard as a psychological disease? Well, that's a good question, isn't it? If you said to a psychologist or psychiatrist, would it be today, that you think this person is possessed by a demon, they would look at you askance and they would reach for their prescription pad and they would say, well, give him some of this. He's obviously got a brain disorder, and if that doesn't work, maybe we'll have to give him some electroconvulsive therapy or cut off the frontal lobes of his brain. They don't understand or accept that there is a supernatural world, and that the supernatural world could interact with the natural world in such a way as to cause demonic possession. But certainly Jesus believed that, and if you're a Christian, I think you ought to believe that too, that there are such things as demons. In the Bible, they're referred to simply as unclean spirits, is what he cast out. The fact that the man inhabited a graveyard gives us a clue. These demons would appear to have been earthbound spirits of dead people. That's what you're going to find in a graveyard, is it not? That's the sort of spirits you would expect to find in a graveyard, particularly if it's a graveyard of these Gadarenes. Who knows what sort of religion they practiced, if any. These earthbound spirits, lacking bodies of their own, they were inhabiting the body of the poor wretch. They were supernatural entities, souls like our own. Yeah, we have souls which are supernatural entities, and if you've been following any of my lectures, you should have come across that concept by now. And if you're a Christian, or probably most other religions, you have this idea that you have a soul as well as a body. Anyway, they were supernatural entities, souls like our own, that were squatters in someone else's body. So this poor wretch, he had got all these other souls crammed into his body, taking him over, multiple possession. When Jesus asked the spirit his name, he said, "We are legion. You know, there are 1,000 of us." And he cast them out into the pigs. And the pigs didn't want them either and jumped off a cliff. Anyway, this is one kind of possession. It leads to loss of identity, confusion about self, and a multiple personality disorder. So you get people who have these multiple personalities. I think it's quite reasonable to think that this might be some kind of multiple demonic possession. I'm not a psychologist or psychiatrist, and I'm sure they'll tell me I'm completely nuts for saying that. Maybe I got a disorder myself. But the backing from religious traditions that long predate the inventions of Freud and Jung and the rest of them would tell us that you have souls, and other souls can invade your psyche and take over. And you end up with a multiple personality disorder if it's not dealt with. We can surmise that the poor man was really confused, and most likely was seen to be talking to himself as he wandered around the graveyard. In reality, this would have been the different souls fighting among themselves for the microphone of his voice. You can imagine if you've got 1,000 different demons in you, and they want to have their say, they want to get to use your vocal ability to talk to people and say things and swear at them even. And I think you see this sometimes when you have people walking down the street, talking to themselves and swearing and cursing. What is going on there? Is it really just a frontal, lobe condition? Is it really just a lack of inhibition, or is it different entities inhabiting this person's psyche, taking over his mind, and doing these things? I think there's something to think about, isn't it? Now, trance mediums are people who have the ability for their soul to voluntarily leave their body in order to allow another entity to speak through them. They are different from clairvoyants in that when they return into the body, they cannot remember anything that was said during the period of their absence. And that's a telling thing. I've met a trance medium, and it was exactly like that. He sat in his chair and he breathed a few times, and he shook a little bit, and he left his body, and a different entity came in and started speaking through him. I don't recommend this. I absolutely don't recommend this. But they're not the same thing as regular clairvoyants who don't go into trance like that. They don't they don't go out of their body. They're still in there. But the trance medium can't remember anything that was said because it wasn't him saying it. I'll carry on here. I've met one such medium who demonstrated this for me. When he returned, he had no knowledge at all of what the other entity had been saying. However, he was able to describe where he had been in the interim and gave some interesting information about this. In other words, he went into the spirit world and he saw things there which were not what we see in the natural world. And I now believe that Edgar Cayce, the famous sleeping prophet, was really a trance medium too. Now, before I go on with this, I should say I know the Cayce material quite well, and I've actually lectured at their headquarters in Virginia Beach quite a few times. And the story goes with Edgar Cayce, he had a bump on the head or something when he was a boy, and since that he began to develop various psychic abilities. And one of these was that he could lie down on a couch, go to sleep, and you could ask him questions then, and he would be able to answer your questions, particularly about physical conditions. And someone had an ailment, they didn't know what it was. They didn't even need to be in the room with him. You could tell him where they were, and somehow he would be able to say, yes, I see the body, it's got this, that, and the other wrong with it. It needs this, that, and the other medicine, and you'll find it in the chemist shop down the high street, and it's on the third shelf up. You'll find it there. It's an old thing, they haven't been using it for a while, but there is a bottle of it there. Amazing mediumship to be able to do something like that. But Edgar, when he came back into his body, or woke up, he couldn't remember any of that. He didn't know. He had to read the notes that would be made about what had been said, because it wasn't really him saying it. So I'm quite convinced that he was actually a trance medium. He may not have quite realised this himself, and nobody ever says that he was a trance medium, but it has all the hallmarks of that. And that is actually something which is quite dangerous to do. Trance mediumship is inherently dangerous, and I would not recommend it to anyone. It is an easy way to become possessed by other supernatural entities. Yeah, they might decide they don't want to go. Furthermore, the information that comes through such mediums is not to be trusted either. They will frequently, this is the entity speaking through the trance medium, they will frequently mix up fact with fiction in order to hoodwink their clients. The trance medium himself, herself, may be totally unaware of this. In fact, they will be. They won't know any more than what's been recorded and written down and shown to them afterwards, because they weren't really there. They were out of their body in some other zone, maybe unconscious even, but the trance medium, something else is speaking through them. And I believe this is what happened to Edgar Cayce. He was a genuine man who sought to help his clients. However, while his entity was mostly accurate in the health readings that he gave, the past life readings were full of fictional material. I believe they have misled many searchers after truth, and I'm thinking here particularly about the things he had to say about Egypt. And if you know anything about Edgar Cayce and his Rata and the rest of that, you'll know that it's completely at odds with what we discovered since about the nature of ancient Egypt and the history of ancient Egypt. You might say, well, we don't know the right thing. He knew the right thing, and what we think we know is all wrong. You might think that, but the more I've gone into this, the more I'm convinced that the story he gave of ancient Egypt was largely fictional. Most psychics are not trance mediums as such. They have a familiar spirit or psychic pal who informs them almost like whispering in their ear. Such spirits are demonic and belong to the supernatural world too. And I'm thinking of something else. You may have heard of the famous Oracle of Delphi, or Delphi, in Greece, in the ancient world, ancient Greece. And people would go there. Kings would send messengers to find out, things for them. Ordinary people would go there. And the oracle, you had, there was a hole in the ground, and the priestesses would sit in this hole breathing fumes coming out of the earth, and they'd get very stoned on this. And then people would ask questions, but the answers would always come back as sort of trickster type questions. And the famous one was the King Midas, I think it was, or was it Croesus, of Lydia, sent a messenger. He was contemplating having a war with Persia. Lydia was a powerful kingdom in the west of what's now Turkey. And he sent a messenger, should I, fight a war against Persia, to see who would come out on top. And the answer came back, if you undertake this war, a great empire will fall. And I said, well, that's it, I'm going to win. I'll defeat the Persians and take over. But when the war was fought, he was the one that was defeated. The richest man in the world. He was defeated, and he lost his kingdom, his empire. And he became basically a slave to the Persian king, who took him around with him everywhere. So they can be very, very tricksy. And the god speaking from there was called Apollo, supposedly. And Apollo is the same as Apollyon, who's mentioned in the Revelation as a demonic spirit. So you can see that the ancient Greeks were tied up with these demonic spirits, guiding them, sometimes maybe guiding them in a good way, and other times having fun and messing them around. So you can't trust these kind of spirits to tell the truth. Now then, in English, the English word demon comes from the Greek word daimonos, and the philosopher Socrates is said to have had a personal daimonos who helped him with his work. This referred to something rather different than we would normally call a demon. In Latin, he is said to have had a genius. That's how they translate this word daimonos. In other words, a person is not a genius, he has a genius. So when you say someone is a genius, what you should be saying, he has a genius. This type of genius has much the same meaning as a genie, or what the Arabs call a jinn. Think of Aladdin and his lamp. In Old English, we would call such an entity a fairy, or nature spirit. Such spirits belong to the supernatural category, so these are also supernatural entities, but they belong to a different sort of world from the human world. They're really connected with the natural world of plants as guides or things that look after them. So that is another category. So is it wise to be away with the fairies? Probably not. Fairies may have an important role to play in sending nature, but they have no interest in human development. If the genie grants you 3 wishes, it is on the basis that you give back something in return. That something is liable to be your own potential for self-development. Yeah, they'll be taking energy, creative energy from you, and you need that creative energy for your own self-development of your soul in preparation for the next life to go to heaven. That's the problem with calling up genies and playing with jinns and demons. You pay them, and you pay them with your most precious currency, which is your higher energy. This is the danger in all forms of witchcraft. Playing around with nature spirits or genies can lead to demonic possession by them. You will almost certainly end up like Bottom. Remember Bottom in Midsummer Night's Dream, with an ass's head in place of a human one? That is one message in Shakespeare's play. You know the play, the fairies and this guy goes to sleep, and the king of the fairies casts a spell on his wife Tanya. She'll fall in love with the first person she meets, and she sees this guy sleeping in the woods, and he's also had a spell put on him that gives him a donkey's head, an ass's head, and she falls in love with this guy with an ass's head. It's really a kind of skit on the way that fairies can make you stupid. And I think Shakespeare was onto something with that. There's more to it, the play, than that, but that's part of it anyway. A more extreme form of demonic possession is if you sign a contract with a fallen angel, as Dr. Faust does with Mephistopheles in Christopher Marlowe's play, Faustus. Mephistopheles, obviously a very senior devil, if not Satan himself, grants Faust a charmed life. He will have riches, power, sex, fame, and all the other things that human beings in their lower nature crave. All he has to do is sign a contract in his own blood, giving Mephistopheles his soul after death. This is the Faustian Contract, as they call it. You'll get all these goodies, yeah? You'll be rich, famous, powerful, you'll have loads of money, you'll have the girls throwing themselves at you. All these things, which are really superficial and pointless as a point of view of your higher self, but to your body, your bodily lower self, it craves for these things. Or with some people it does. And the devil can play on that, or Mephistopheles. He doesn't care if you have 60, 70 years of fun and games. At the end of that very short time, you're going to have to give up your soul, your higher potential, your real essence, and you're going to be taken to hell. This is a cautionary tale, and is something you definitely should not do at any cost. However, people do make contracts with evil, and often they think they're doing something worthy. They may not even see what they have got themselves into until it is too late, and they're bound. This happens a lot with so-called cults, but we will come to this shortly. If you are unfortunate enough to have made such a pledge, perhaps when you were young and stupid, It can still be broken. You will not be strong enough to defeat Satan on your own, but if you open your heart and sincerely call on Jesus for help, you can still be rescued. This happens in one version of Goethe's Faust. In other words, in that version of Faust, having done all this, and at the very last minute when he's going to be dragged off to hell, he calls to Jesus and heaven for help, and he is helped, and he was saved from the devil. So that is a possibility. But mostly, if people have gone into this kind of contract, they don't have any faith. They don't believe in God. They don't believe in Christianity. They don't believe in anything. They're atheists. And then they're going to pay the price. Now then, returning back to Jesus, the last sermon that Jesus gave to his disciples prior to his entry into Jerusalem and the events of his crucifixion is given in Matthew chapter 24. This sermon is a series of prophecies concerning the destruction of Jerusalem and also the end of the present age. In large part, it is a warning for us to stay awake and beware of falling into demonic traps. Jesus warns us to be on our guard for false prophets and teachings, especially at this time, which is to say the end of the age. So it goes on here. And Jesus answered them, "See that no one leads you astray, for many will come in my name, saying, 'I am the Christ,' and they will lead many astray." Further on he continues, "And many false prophets will arise, and lead many astray, and because lawlessness will be increased, the love of many will grow cold. Then, if anyone says to you, 'Look, here is the Christ,' or 'There he is,' do not believe it, for false Christs and false prophets will arise, and perform great signs and wonders, so as to lead astray, if possible, even the elect. See, I have told you beforehand. So, if they say to you, 'Look, he is in the wilderness,' do not go out. If they say, 'Look, he is in the inner rooms,' do not believe it. For as the lightning comes from the east and shines as far as the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather." And that's in the Matthew Gospel, chapter 24, verses 23 to 28. And I advise you to read that, Matthew 24. Very important set of prophecies for our times. Now, I believe this prophecy has come true in our own times. It is one more sign that this is indeed the end of the age. And we're going to have a look now at certain cults that seem to be exactly what he was saying about people claiming to be Christ over here or over there, and don't believe them. They're leading many astray. So here are some examples, but there are many more. And here's a nice right one to start with. There have been many false prophets in recent decades, and more are coming. One of the most notorious was this man, Sun Myong-Moon. A North Korean by birth, he founded a pseudo-Christian sect called the Unification Church. His teaching, he's got a lot of complicated teachings in books he wrote and all sorts of stuff, but when you boil it down, it comes down to this. Was that his teaching, when boiled down to its essentials, was that though Jesus Christ was a good man, he had failed in his mission. He wasn't meant to get crucified, and that had screwed things up. Now, to put things right, God had chosen Moon to make a fresh attempt. He was going to complete Jesus' failed mission. In other words, he was to be the new Christ, the one who was going to lead the world into a new age. Moon exercised a remarkable hold over his followers, many of whom were from Europe and America. They hung on his every word and truly believed that he was the coming Messiah. His movement, popularly known as the Moonies, earned the epithet the cult that breaks up families. That was in the Daily, and every time they wrote about him, they wrote about the cult that breaks up families. I think he had sued them for saying that, and he'd failed in that suit. And so the judge had ruled that he did break up families, so they're quite justified in saying that. So they printed that and published it every time they mentioned his name, the cult that breaks up families. This was a reference to the way followers turned their backs on family and friends as they followed this Pied Piper. They became, in effect, slaves to the cult. They were slaves. They had to do all sorts of jobs to raise money for it, living in appalling conditions themselves with hardly enough to eat. But they gave everything they could to the cult. To add insult to injury, Moon organised mass weddings. He would choose at random brides and grooms for his followers. Thousands of Moonies would be married at the same time, blessed by Moon himself. Often the couples had never even met before and may not even have spoken the same language. Can you believe it? And Moon's mantra was unification, and he thought if he could accelerate a borderless world by encouraging mixed marriage, he was furthering a globalist agenda. Well, he may have been doing that, but he wasn't thinking about the happiness of his followers marrying people they'd never met before, probably a different race and culture, nation, couldn't even speak the same language. And then, they're married, they're, off to bed and going to have children. I mean, that's a shocking abuse of a guru's authority to do such a thing to his people. And they follow like blind sheep. I'm sure many of those marriages haven't survived. But I know that on one occasion, at least, there was something like 30,000 people married at once by this guy. It's unbelievable. Unbelievable. One has to ask, how did this North Korean man, a one-time communist, later Christian convert, come to have such power over people that they would give their lives to the movement? Why would anyone today allow someone else to randomly decide on the stranger they should marry, regardless of age, race, or nationality, or if you fancied the person? That didn't matter, he's chosen them for you. A devotee would no doubt answer that Moon was God incarnate, so knew better than them who their perfect wife, husband should be. A truer answer is that, like many other gurus and leaders, he was undoubtedly demonically possessed. One of the things about demons is it can give people extraordinary charisma. People are overwhelmed by the charisma of the leader, the guru, the teacher. And they follow them blindly, and they'll do whatever they say because they're under a spell. It is true. They actually have a spell cast on them. And they're spellbound. That's the right word for it. And Moon was like that. He was casting spells. These people were getting spellbound by this demonic spirit which was working through Moon. Moon was also a cheat. In 1971, he moved to the US. However, in 1982, he was found guilty of tax evasion and was sent to jail for 18 months. He died in 2012. His mission as the Messiah came to an ignoble end. In other words, he wasn't a Christ. It didn't happen with him. He just died the death in 2012. However, his cult still exists. Today, the Unification Church still has an estimated membership of 3 million, most of them in South Korea. So these cults have a habit of carrying on long after the founder is dead and buried. They became, the founders of these cults, they became like God figures themselves. At the very least, they're saints, and their followers are still following blindly and recruiting new people into the demonic spirit that's running that cult can very often transfer to someone else and use them as their vehicle. A perhaps better known cult is the Church of Scientology. Although it uses the Christian symbol of the cross, you can see one on top of the building there, and calls itself a church, its teachings are anything but Christian. It is actually a peculiar mixture of parapsychology and science fiction. This is not so surprising given that its founder, L. Ron Hubbard, was a science fiction author before starting a cult of his own. Having its headquarters in Los Angeles, it has strong affiliations with the movie industry. A number of actors have been or are members. Thus is it slick in presentation, and its buildings are like movie sets, at least some of them, and the pictures I've seen. I presume they've not only got actors members, people that make sets and people who design sets, and other people who work in the movie industry, obviously members. Like Moon's Unification Church, Scientology has been accused of breaking up families. Those who join the sect are expected to give their lives to it. It has also been subject to accusations given by former members of sexual abuse and of acts of violence, even of treating people like slaves. And that's not me saying that. You can see reports from former members who've, we would say in England, on Queen's evidence, revealing the real truth of what goes on behind those blue walls. L. Ron Hubbard was himself a very colourful figure. His literary career began in the 1930s when he discovered a talent for writing pulp fiction, especially science fiction. During World War II, he was a US naval officer commanding 2 ships, but was relieved of command both times. After the war, he shared a house in LA with a close associate of British occultist Aleister Crowley. Now, if you haven't come across Aleister Crowley, avoid him or avoid anything to do with Crowley like the absolute plague. That is a really, really serious demonic figure and a really dangerous demon working through it. Keep away at all costs and don't touch it. Unfortunately, many people have, and a lot of the pop industry got involved with Crowleyism, but keep away. Gurdjieff met Crowley and referred to him as being filthy inside, and I think that's a good description. Anyway, this led to involvement with the Crowley magic circle called the Ordo Templi Orientis. Hubbard learned that, if marketed properly, there was money to be made from the occult. In 1949, he developed a psychological system he called Dianetics. Since every event of a person's past and present lives is stored in their soul's memory, he believed that it was possible to relieve traumas by making these memories conscious. In other words, if you can remember something bad that happened in your past life, you might be able to relieve something that's causing you problems in this life, perhaps an allergy, for example, or an unreasoned fear. Maybe you had an unreasoned fear to do with chickens, and I believe Edgar Cayce quoted an example of this, someone who had been sacrificed by the Aztecs and smeared with chicken's blood, and in this life, or the more recent one, had a total fear of chickens. As you would, make that fear conscious and you could relieve them of that. So that seems a quite reasonable, good thing to do. His book Dianetics became a bestseller. People were into this. They were into trying it out. And he started running courses on his technique as an alternative to psychotherapy. Yeah, you do a past life regression and find out about the thing that's been traumatizing you from the past, and you get relief from it. I think that sounds very promising if you could do it properly. And this led him eventually setting up the Church of Scientology. So that's where this Scientology thing comes from. It's an augmentation, an extension of this idea. Today, both Hubbard and Scientology are mired in controversy. A trickster, liar, plagiarist, thief and philanderer, Hubbard was certainly possessed. Yeah, I think so. Meanwhile, Scientology has centres all over the world and a net worth estimated at over $1.5 billion. Selling his soul to the devil clearly paid, at least in the short term. But it's a shame he couldn't take it with him. Yeah, that's the thing. You might get wealth, you might get power, you might get sex, you might get all of these things in this world, but you can't take it with you, and you're going to have to face up to what you've done, and you're going to be punished for it. You can be sure of that in the next world, in the supernatural world. So don't go there, don't do it. Now, we're carrying on here. Another more recent guru was Bhagwan Shri Rajneesh. I thought I'd do a few of these to show it's not just an isolated incident. Known these days as Osho. As a teenager, he immersed himself in communist literature. That's something that comes up again and again with these gurus. They start off as communists, and then they convert to something else, usually maybe some form of extreme Christianity, fringe sect or something. And they decide, well, I can do this. I can be the guy. I don't have to be going to church on my knees. I can be the guy that's at the middle of the thing. Anyway, he started off, immersed himself in communist literature as well as taking up yoga and other forms of Indian occultism. He obtained degrees in philosophy, I presume it was Indian philosophy, and then became a teacher, lecturing widely. His radical ideas led him into conflict with various authorities. You bet. As early as 1968, he was teaching that free sex was the path to enlightenment. This earned him the title the Sex Guru. From 1974 to 81, he had his own ashram or monastery at Pune in India. It attracted thousands of followers, mainly from the West. They were drawn by the promise of lots of free sex while also gaining enlightenment. His followers were fanatically loyal and famous for always wearing orange robes and beads. I remember meeting, some of them in London. They were real fanatics trying to convert everyone they came in contact with. And they always wore these orange robes, which looked ridiculous, but they couldn't see that. They, as far as they were concerned, they were like Buddhist monks, even if they were having lots of free sex on the side, with whichever of the members was willing to, on that day. There was no kind of pairing up. There's no real marriage or any permanent relationships. It was just sex for sex's sake, just to have a release. Eventually, he was driven out of India. He moved to the US. Oh, they all go to the US, don't they? Go to where the honeypot is. Establishing a new center in Oregon. It too became notorious, not just for its free love attitudes, but also for the lawlessness of his followers. They were thieves, going out robbing supermarkets and things. At his cult's height, he owned several planes and a remarkable collection of 93 Rolls Royces. Who do you imagine paid for those? His followers. Another bunch that were earning money and giving it all to the sect so he could buy more Rolls Royces. He seemed to have a fetish about these luxury cars. At least one was fitted with smoke grenade launchers, like something out of a James Bond movie. Oh, incredible. The downfall of Rajneesh came about quickly after his followers attempted a takeover of the Oregon county in which their ashram was located. A group of Rajneeshis attempted to poison the local residents of the Dales in Oregon as town with salmonella. 751 people were taken ill. The intention was to swing the vote in the county elections so that the Rajneeshis would gain control. Obviously they had votes, those ones who were living there, so they wanted to make sure that the local village or townspeople weren't going to outvote them. Local law enforcement, along with the FBI, investigated the commune. His 2 women deputies were found guilty of attempted murder. They each served 29 months of 20-year sentences. They got let out for good behaviour, I think. Rajneesh himself pleaded ignorance of the whole thing and wasn't charged. No one was going to grass on him. In October 1985, Rajneesh attempted to flee the US. He was arrested at North Carolina Airport and charged with 35 deliberate violations of immigration laws. He received a suspended sentence and a fine. He's banned from coming back to America. He was also deported, but found it impossible to stay. Nobody wanted to have him in other places he went to, I think like Jamaica, but found it impossible to stay anywhere more than a few weeks. Nobody wanted him. Reluctantly, he went back to Pune. He eventually died from a combination of uncontrolled diabetes and heart failure. Now known as Osho, he still has thousands of followers. To them, he is a saint, but we can suspect he was actually possessed by demons. Yeah, I think so. As I say, these people, they cast spells on people. How do you entice young people into your sect? Those who are not already brainwashed and under your spell? Promise them sex. Send out the young women to entice the young men. You send out the young men to entice the young women. Get them into their orange robes and get them singing their combiyas or whatever they do together, practicing a bit of yoga, and then off to their tents to have a bit of sex. That's the way to get them in, isn't it? Once you've got them in and under your spell, you have them working for you like slaves, making you enough money so you can buy more and more Rolls Royces. It's unbelievable. Unbelievable. So I think he was possessed by demons. Makes sense to me. Now, not all cults are based on religious principles. There are also political cults, where leaders are treated like living gods. The most famous of these, at least in modern times, is that of Mao Zidong in China. Born into a prosperous peasant family, he started out as a nationalist. However, while working as a librarian, he discovered the works of Karl Marx and was converted to communism. He became a founder member of the Communist Party. But before I go into that, we keep coming back to communism, Karl Marx. Now, I read a very interesting book recently about Karl Marx. He was a filthy, dirty individual, wouldn't wash. He had boils all over him. He never washed his clothes, which were crawling with lice. He had at least 2 children, tried to commit suicide. I think one succeeded. He used to beat up his wife. He's cheated on her. He scrounged off his parents until they died. And then he latched onto Engels, who was some sort of industrialist, had a bit of money. He lived off him. Karl Marx himself never did a day's work in his whole life. No, yeah, he's talking about the working class. He's talking about working class struggle and all this. He was himself a libertarian, living off other people, coming from a middle class background. He was a complete bastard, and yet he's treated as a god. Interestingly, in this book, it explained how he had almost an obsession with the devil. He wrote plays about the devil. He wrote about how, in his diary about the devil, his fantasies about the devil. So, what do you think? I think the guy was probably possessed. And that possession passed into the whole communist movement. It still does today. So, this young peasant boy, Mao, he reads the works of Marx in the library when he's working as a librarian. He's captured by it. He's a founder member of the Chinese Communist Party. In the 1930s, or into World War II, China was a contested country torn between different factions of warlords and Japanese invaders. You can read all about that in the history of China. It's quite detailed and difficult to follow some of it. The defeat of the latter, that's the Japanese in World War II, left the field open for a titanic struggle between the Chinese nationalists, led by Chiang Kai-shek, and the communists, led by Mao. The nationalists were called the Kuomintang Party, I believe. So the Kuomintang, led by Chiang Kai-shek, and the communists, led by Mao. In 1949, victory eventually went to the communists. Chiang Kai-shek and the remnants of the nationalist army fled to the island of Taiwan. Yeah, at that time it was called Formosa. It's called Taiwan these days. This is why the Taiwan question is so important in the eyes of the Chinese Communist Party. They regard the capture of the island and the destruction of the last remnants of the nationalists as unfinished business. That's why they're so obsessed with this little island off the coast, away from China. It's not just that they need that extra territory. It's that is the hub of what's left of the legacy of the nationalists, and they want to stamp it out. Mao and the CCP were quick to suppress all forms of potential threat to their takeover. Christianity, which had been gaining many converts as the result of a century of missionary activity, was suppressed. Lots of priests were put to death, and Christians were persecuted. So too were other forms of religious practice. For communism is essentially atheistic. You had to become communist now. That was going to be the new doctrine, and everything else had to be got rid of. In 1950, the Chinese communists invaded Tibet. The Tibetans were treated most brutally. Their monasteries closed, women raped, and spiritual inscriptions used in urinals. In 1959, the Dalai Lama fled to India to establish a government in exile. The persecutions of Tibetans continues to this day. Indeed, Tibet has been largely repopulated with Han Chinese. So in other words, Tibet is an imperial conquest, the genocide against the actual Tibetans, and repopulated with Han Chinese. That's the normal Chinese. Between 1958 to 62, Mao ordered the Great Leap Forward. This led to small-scale factories in backyards, as well as small-scale farming. It was a disaster and led to famine, with 20 million people dying. In 1966, Mao launched his Cultural Revolution. The middle class, teachers, musicians, artists, sculptors and the like, as well as many bureaucrats, were sent to work in the fields. Intellectuals were beaten and often murdered by ignorant young people who hadn't been educated. The old China was largely destroyed. That means statues, anything with inscriptions, anything to do with the long, thousands and thousands year old tradition of China, just destroyed overnight. The old China was largely destroyed by these young zealots who worshipped Mao and his little red book. You can see them all there with their little red books with the sayings of Chairman Mao. The legacy of the Cultural Revolution was a poorly educated generation whose lives were ruined as they were ill-equipped for career progress after Mao's death. Yeah, I imagine they could barely speak Chinese, let alone know anything about engineering or science or technology. Mao died in 1976, and like an Egyptian pharaoh, his body was turned into a mummy. To this day it lies in state in a private mausoleum off Tiananmen Square. This is the behaviour of an absolute ruler who after death wants to be revered as a god. With his passing there was, at least for a time, some liberalisation in China, at least in the economic sphere. It soon became possible for people to wear clothes other than the uniform Mao suits. Everybody had to dress the same in Mao's time. The West started investing, and within a few decades, China became the workshop of the world, making everything from nuts and bolts to electric cars. Well, we know about this. One thing did not change: the iron grip of the Communist Party. It remains the sole arbiter of everything under a new dictator, Xi Jinping, who models himself on Mao. It would seem that the same demon that possessed Mao, I believe Mao was another one possessed with demons, now inhabits Xi. This is another form of demonic possession, where the demon jumps from generation to generation to maintain control. So I would call the Chinese Communist Party a cult. And it's a cult that is not going to easily relinquish power until the demons are dealt with. Well, as they will be in due course. Are there other demonically possessed individuals in our own times? It would be wrong to point the finger at individuals without more proof, but I suspect that there are few fake prophets around. I leave it to you to identify who they are. One candidate for an organisation, and I underline that, an organisation rather than an individual, that prophesies falsely is the World Economic Forum. Led by economist Klaus Schwab, you can see him there on the right. This is a cult that holds its meetings in secret in Davos in Switzerland. Only the mega-rich and those chosen by the elite as future political leaders may attend. The WEA has for years been preaching that the world should be governed by a single elite body. There should be no more nation-states and no more democracy. They shocked most ordinary people when they predicted a world where we, which is to say the non-elite, would own nothing and be happy. This sounds to me like the prospectus for giving everyone the mark of the beast. Read about the mark of the beast in Revelations chapter 13, especially verses 16 to 17. In conclusion, and I think we ought to end on a more positive note, I would remind everyone that the supernatural realm is not solely the playground of negative entities and demons. Its higher levels is the realm of the angelic host, who are entities far more powerful than even Satan. If you find yourself caught up in a cult or threatened in some way by the black arts, do not be afraid to call on the power of Jesus Christ and the Archangel Michael for help. Even Satan himself cannot stand before them, for he is already a defeated enemy and is awaiting with trepidation the fulfillment of the prophecies contained in the Bible. So, I hope if you didn't exactly enjoy this lecture, you will understand that the supernatural is something we have to reckon with. It's not good enough to just look around us and say, well, there's a physical world, I'm physical, everything I see is physical. There's inanimate air, there's inanimate stones, there's animals, vegetables, minerals, nothing else. Well, there is something else. There's a supernatural, above nature, and it's governed by different laws and different rules from this natural world, and it has power over this natural world. And if you don't grasp that, you can be in real danger. And that's why we need the church. That's why we need Jesus Christ. That's why we need God, above all, to help us to get out of this, I would call it one of those fly traps, you know, that they have, the ones with the lid, and you get on the lip and you lick the honey and you fall in and the thing digests you. That's what this world is that we're trapped in, and we've got to get out of it. It's a fly trap, and we're the flies, and we have to find our way out of it. Remember that we are supernatural beings. We're not just animal flesh. We are supernatural beings. We have the light in us. We have souls. We are entities ourselves. We must not allow ourselves to be tricked by these cunning demons and fallen angels into giving up our birthright. We have the right to get off this planet and return to higher levels where we truly belong. So thank you very much for your patience and your time, and look forward to talking to you again. Thank you.